get more on this story now and those calls from climate change experts for the UK to ramp up efforts to cut carbon emissions. I'm joined now by Jonathan Marshall, energy analyst at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Hello to you, Jonathan. So this report calling for a target of to 2050 to end net emissions. Is that realistic? Is it ambitious enough, or does it go too far?
It's realistic and it's in line with the science. The big UN climate report last year showed that we needed to globally to be on around net zero emissions by the second half of the century, with developed nations such as the UK getting there 2050 or just before. So it's in line with the science and it's in line with what reasonable policy you can expect.
Reasonable policy, is it reasonable to expect the public to make the changes that this entails in terms of our own lifestyles? It's quite a big shift.
I mean, some change will be easier than others. Like we saw in the piece, it's easy. The transition in so electricity is already well underway. The transition in transport, such moving to electric cars, we know how to do that, and it's sort of expected how that will carry on. And there are other things that are easier than it's currently billed as well, like the shift away from high carbon heating at home towards lower carbon sources such as a heat pump or hydrogen. That is very much achievable over the next 30 years. If you have a home boiler that lasts 10 years. Just wait until it comes to the end of its life, and then just replace it with a low carbon alternative. We don't need to go around ripping boilers out. We don't need to do anything drastic. It's just steady progress towards our targets.
But we're told we need to turn our thermostats down to 19 Celsius, for example. We need to eat less meat. We need to stop using petrol and diesel cars. And perhaps the most challenging is the aviation industry. Are we all expected to stop flying?
I mean, there are solutions to the vast majority of those problems. The reason we have our thermostats so high, for example, is because our homes are so inefficient and so leaky. If we make sure all our windows and walls and roofs are insulated properly, we'll lose less heat from our homes, so we won't have to have the heating as high. With eating less meat, it's not eating less meat across the board, it's just eating less red meat, which has a higher carbon emissions associated with it. So instead of having beef, have pork or chicken or fish. Aviation is one of the trickier ones, which is why this goal is a net zero goal. You're not going to be able to remove emissions from aviation, so you have to offset them through things like negative emissions technologies, such as planting more trees, restoring natural peatland, or even developing technology to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
I suppose the question, though, is how much difference can we as individuals make when you have countries like China pumping out carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, when you have the US pulling out of the Paris Accord? What difference can we as individuals, by cutting down on red meat, by turning down the thermostat, does it make any difference at all?
I mean, so you're right, the UK, we only account for about 1% of global carbon emissions, but we do have an outsized impact on what we do reflects well across the world. So if we make the transition to a zero carbon economy, relatively easy with developing industries along the way, we'll show other nations that it can be done, that there are many positives to be done. And then when other nations make that switch, we'll have the industries and the business and the knowledge based in the UK to export to these other countries.
Do you think that the message is getting through? Of course, we had the Extinction Rebellion protests. We've got school children going out on strike from school. We're hearing that message. The message is being heard, but do we actually care enough to make those fundamental changes?
Absolutely. I mean, a poll released the other day showed that the environment is now in the top 3 of concerns for people.
What I'm asking is, it's up there as a concern, but is it up there as a concern to be practical enough about it?
It is, and once the options are there, people opt for them. Low carbon electricity providers are very popular. Low carbon, electric vehicles are very popular. If you try to buy an electric vehicle today, you'll be waiting for about 6 months to get one because the waiting list is so long. So these low carbon options are popular. It's just you need more policy to bring them on, to make them more present everywhere, and then more people can choose to use them.
How do we in the UK rank in terms of our efforts to reduce emissions?
So in the UK, we're doing very well. We're up there with the best of them. Since 1990, we've cut our carbon emissions by more than 40%, and at the same time, we've grown our economy by more than 70%, which shows that you don't need to have a negative impact on businesses, on way of life, on industry to cut carbon emissions.
OK, Jonathan Marshall, great to hear your thoughts. Thanks very much indeed.